So yeah, Rudy gave an excellent introduction, so I don't have the science applications. Rudy covered that nicely. First of all, thank you, Brian, for putting it all together. Happy birthday, Bob. I came to Los Alamos to look at neutron transmission, which is the leftover. After all the diffracted neutrons comes out, or are out of the transmitted beam, you're left with what's called Bragg edges, right? When Bragg's law, sine theta reaches 1 in the transmitted signal, you get a steep increase. That's called a Bragg edge. And my job was to analyze that type of data. I learned that it has something to do with diffraction, which was, as a physics student, okay, I know the basics of Bragg's law. But then I learned, okay, structure factors, space groups, and all that kind of stuff. And then I learned about this Rietveld method. And being in Los Alamos, I talked to Bob and said, okay, well, how does this work? And how can we implement it for Bragg edges? Bob first said, maybe we make another data type in GSAS, but that never happened. So I wrote that code for Bragg edge analysis, reverse engineering or using the GSAS manual and going backwards, because it turns out that the Bragg edge profile is the integral of the diffraction peak profile. So I read all the time of flight diffraction peak profile works from Bob and spent about 3 weeks manually integrating the diffraction peak profile and coming up with that. So that's how I got to learn about GSAS. I read the manual first and then applied it later, because later I became a postdoc on the SMARTS instrument that was built in parallel with Hippo and worked with Bob for about a year. We overlapped, and then Bob left and Hippo was left alone because Kristen had left, Bob left, Rudy came, had 8 days of beam time, got about 6 hours of actual useful data, some of it is now the published iron work, so it took him 4 or 5 years, and people were desperate enough to make me the Hippo instrument scientist about half a year after Bob left, and that's where we overlap. So because I worked quite a bit with the basics that Bob laid out, I wanted to cover some of those very fundamental works that Bob did still at Arizona State, but during the sabbatical at ISIS, the fundamentals of the peak profiles that you need for time-of-flight neutron diffraction that are different from reactor or X-rays, that we still use every day today at pulse neutron sources, at LANSCE every day, at SNS. It all goes back to these early works. And yeah, when I derived this Bragg edge profile, I asked Bob, what is this race parameter? What is a good value? And Bob said, just pick something close to infinity, like 1. Coming from Germany, where the professors are a little bit more formal and typically don't joke with the students, that was, hey, Los Alamos is a good atmosphere. So yeah, I derived these edge profiles and based on these fundamental works. Reading about at those days, about what Rietveld can do, one of the really impressive pieces of work that I found was the simultaneous refinement of neutrons and X-rays. Superconductors, when I studied physics in the 90s, early 90s, was a very hot topic. And then there was this work where Bob and co-workers, and Dave is here too, analyzed the crystal structure of yttrium barium cuprate with a joint X-ray and neutron diffraction. I found that, at that time, studying all of that, I found that a very nice piece of work, which for some reason, there's not that many works after that utilize the combination. I think there's only about 30, 40 papers that combine neutrons and X-rays, and it feels like it could be done more. Then what Bob always did also in GSAS, it's a time-of-flight neutron code, and you feel that every time you use GSAS, at least the old GSAS, it was made at a type pulse neutron source for pulse neutron analysis, and Bob always had these very detailed analyses in there, including the extinction. And there was a classic paper with Sabine from 1988, and just about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, I finished measuring 24 samples Jim made, and we're going to analyze this with Bob. So there's a 2023 LANSCE proposal to revisit extinction and the effects on powder diffraction analysis. So it's coming full circle more or less, and now I'm honored to be part of these types of studies. And go back to the basics. For neutron diffraction, one of the big things is, of course, magnetic structures also. For pulsed neutrons, you have more than one histogram typically on modern instruments, and Bob's implementation of magnetic structures in GSAS helped to enable simultaneous refinements against multiple diffraction patterns to get the crystal and magnetic structure simultaneously. We always wanted to do magnetic texture measurements. That never happened, but maybe there's something for the future that we still can do. So there's this, I believe, the first paper on the magnetic structure of an iron phosphate. We heard about iron manganese phases earlier, where Bob applied GSAS to solve magnetic structures. Let's go to the next one. There it goes. Oops, skip 2. Oops, now I have to go back. Don't touch. All of that was done with GSAS, right? This giant piece of software, very, very powerful. At LANSCE, we still use the old GSAS, the good old text mode GSAS. It just works. It does what it's supposed to do. It's like take a toothbrush away. I should rather share my toothbrush than giving up my data analysis software. I like it so much with Hippo.
I'm writing that down, Sven.
Yeah, that's Charlton Heston, right from my cold dead hands. As Rudy pointed out, with Hippo, we collect data at very rapid rates, right? And so I wrote this little GSAS language. That's how much I like GSAS. I have a programming language where we can do the conditional refinements and set up analysis. On Hippo, we have 45 histograms per run. You rotate a little bit, you end up with 135 histograms without scripting. That doesn't work. So we still use that quite a bit, or besides MAUT, exclusively. That's a snapshot from last night from the APS website where you still can download the old GSAS. It hasn't been changed. The GSAS kit there, right? The first one, the real one. Graphical user interface, great. But if you have like hundreds of runs, it's a lot of mouse clicking. So we downloaded the GSAS kit. Hasn't been changed in 2009, but on the bright side, it also doesn't need many changes anymore, right? It's very.
Not going to get any.
I call it a mature software product, right? So it works, right? It's still there. So maybe one of these days we try GSAS too. But besides all the software, Bob, as John Parisi pointed out, Bob also worked in hardware. So first I found this old report on the feasibility study for high pressure, where the pressure wasn't really applied. It was just the measurement in those days, I think. But it laid the groundwork for a pretty successful high pressure program in the 1990s using HIPD. I almost think there's more high pressure work from HIPD than there was later with Hippo and Yusheng's TOP 98. So very productive. And then, as Rudy mentioned, texture measurements happened. Until that time, texture measurements were with a goniometer, right? And you measure pole figures and then invert them and get the orientation distribution function. In Rietveld refinement, there was this famous March-Dollars preferred orientation correction. It's not a texture model. It's not an ODF. It's a correction factor. So Bob implemented that for the first time in Rietveld refinement. I also found this old experimental report, also from the 1992 run cycle progress report that John Parisi cited, and it's Rudy Wenk's proposal together with Siegfried Mattis, Angus Larson, Bob, and Joyce Roberts. And Rudy complained about problems such as computers not working, some tapes from ILL couldn't be read, and stepper motors not working. So this was 1992, and then in 2002, Rudy came back and had the same problems on Hippo, that nothing really worked, and then he was very complaining a little bit about that. And then in the red highlighted area, you see this nucleation of the MAUT code, where Rudy reached out to that guy in Trento to do texture analysis. in Rietveld. But Bob was, the first one that put a full ODF in there. Oh, actually, both were in 1997. The Mouch paper came out in 97 and Bob's paper came out in 97 on GSAS. But to have the full ODF refinement in powder diffraction, which is now standard for a lot of synchrotron material science type studies, and of course, neutron work. So the high pressure and preferred orientation, of course, led to HIPPO. Then later, you saw this before, was submitted in 1997. And as Rudy mentioned, UCMRD was later renamed to HIPPO, which rolls off the tongue much easier. And you can do merchandising with it. The team, Christine, Rudy, and Bob had workshops, nucleated the user facility. So here's some impressions from that time. What's this thing? Yeah, there's a pointer. So Bob here with Rudy at one of the early HIPPO workshops, I think in the La Fonda Hotel in Santa Fe. Maybe something else, something with Dio. Anyway, somewhere in Santa Fe was one of the first HIPPO workshops. I think it was also Christine who came up with the HIPPO logo, right? The HIPPO was a diamond for the high pressure. But yeah, it's still what we saw today as the HIPPO logo. Let's see if we can move forward. No. There it goes. Yeah. Looking at these old projects, the total budget for HIPPO was $4.3 million. I looked at the official Bureau of Labor Statistics and converted that to 2023 dollars. It's still a neutron beamline for less than $8 million. If you go to SNS or ESS, the modern spallation sources, the entry-level beamlines are like $30 million. So it was, even in today's dollars, a pretty efficient project. Something else must have changed with modern neutron sources. So the project was scheduled to be finished, or HIPPO was scheduled to be finished in the fiscal year 2000, so September 2000. I arrived in March as a postdoc on SMARTS. I remember we commissioned SMARTS in 2001 and HIPPO saw first neutrons December 2001, just before the run cycle ended. I believe lots of people borrowed detectors from HIPPO and it was never complete. And we have a lot of and then shortly after that, Bob left Los Alamos, and then Dave took over for 4 months, some run cycle, and then Rudy came and wanted more people on HIPPO and asked me I think first he asked Luca Lucarotti from Trento, the Mout guy, if he wants to do it, and he said, he didn't want to do it. So yeah, then they got stuck with me, and then the rest is history. I'm still there. So here are some photographs. You saw the one with Bob from the delivery of the HIPPO sample tank. That's actually in ER1 at LANSCE. Christine, Angus, and Rudy also in ER1 at LANSCE. I think it's on top of NPD. And then, as we move forward, maybe I'll just do it here. A few more impressions with Yusheng Zhao and Bob in what's now the collimation of HIPPO. Sample tank is here, and Bob happily sitting in the HIPPO sample chamber, where Rudy was later located also. And with that, I summarize. So in summary, for time of flight neutron diffraction, for pulse neutron diffraction, is very and Rietveld refinements in general, it's very hard, in my opinion, to overestimate Bob's contribution to the field. A big thank you from my side for giving me the hardware, HIPPO, and the software, GSAS, to build a career in this field. I'm very appreciative. And with that, happy birthday, Bob. And I actually do have some birthday gifts. So as I said, we do merchandising with the HIPPO. I always tell you with your work shirts. The HIPPO shirt, and then since you moved away from New Mexico, green chili is hard to bring, but at least some red chili from New Mexico from